So it looks like Sony finally gets it when it comes to superhero movies and, of course, particularly Spider-Man movies, or if you could even call them Spider-Man movies, because Spider-Man has yet to appear in any of their Spider-Man adjacent movies. Now, Sony has been torn apart for this, not having Spider-Man in a Spider-Man universe. And big surprise, it didn't really work. And although these new statements that Sony's new CEO has said that we're going to go over sound good, they also make me kind of think, what the hell? How could you think certain things before about your movies? And it honestly is kind of a reason why they were bad. With Venom being the possible exception, because Venom is a popular enough and cool enough character on its own to make people care and draw in a crowd at the box office. And even though those are totally fun and enjoyable films, the Venom films, they're not exactly the best films. You wouldn't put them on par with Captain America the Winter Soldier or Infinity War. And Sony did pause everything that they were doing with Spider-Man and their Spider-Man universe, because they clearly realized what they were doing wasn't going to work, which was great news. It was a great sign that Sony might be catching on to a thing or two, and now this new article also seems to point to Sony finally getting it. The article is titled, "The Bar for Superhero Films Has Been Raised. Sony Pictures CEO Says You Can't Make a Bad Movie," talking about superhero movies. The subtitle reads, "They have to be cultural events that can be marketed that way," Ravi Ahuja says of creating a successful box office hit. The article begins and says, after Sony's Marvel universe of superhero movies sputtered out last fall with the release of Kraven the Hunter, Sony Pictures CEO Ravi Ahuja acknowledged that the bar for superhero movies to be successful at the box office has been raised. He states, "There was a period of time where anything superhero was almost guaranteed to do well. I think the bar for superhero movies, it was relatively low. In the mid-2010s, pretty much all of them would do incredible business. But now even superhero movies have to have a degree of originality. They have to add something different. They have to have emotional connection. They have to be cultural events that can be marketed that way." Now, Ravi Ahuja is the new CEO of Sony. He became the president and CEO in January of this year, 2025. So when we talk about Sony in this video, I'm not putting the entire blame on him, but how could you not have possibly realized this before? Sure, there is definitely truth to what he said. And to me, that clearly explains why they kind of just threw movies out there. That, and of course, they have to keep their rights to Spider-Man, which is also another big problem. Sony at one point in time, well, really the past few years, have just seemingly released whatever to satisfy that contract to keep the licensing to Spider-Man. And at the same time, they thought that whatever they threw out there, since it was a superhero movie, it would do well. The only problem is the superheroes that they chose weren't very good. Venom was great, but I honestly think Venom doing well kind of hurt Sony, because it's exactly what they thought. They thought they could just throw out any superhero movie and it would perform well. Venom seemingly backed that up in their minds. It came out in 2018 and it grossed $856 million worldwide. But it came out after Avengers Infinity War, which came out in April earlier that year in 2018. This was pretty much the peak of superhero movies between Infinity War and Endgame. Of course, Venom did well. Of course, everything kind of did well at that point in time. Captain Marvel grossed over $1 billion at the box office, and Ant-Man and the Wasp, a relatively smaller superhero, if you know what I mean, did $622 million. So clearly at that time, it was a pretty stellar time for superhero movies. And yes, since the hype was so big, anything at that point in time would have done at least decently. You could pretty much have success with whatever you put out if it was a relatively known superhero. However, Sony would quickly go on to see that you just can't release anything. The sequel to Venom, Venom Let There Be Carnage, came out in 2021 and it did just barely 500,000 worldwide. Then Venom The Last Dance did almost 500 million worldwide. And from there, it just kind of tanked. As this article reads, the Jared Leto fronted Morbius limped to 167 million globally with a historic 74% second weekend box office drop that became a social media punchline. The critically savaged Madam Web grossed just 100 million worldwide, and the Aaron Taylor Johnson-led Kraven the Hunter managed a mere 62 million globally. I actually didn't even know that Kraven did worse than Madam Web. But that is what happens when you consistently release bad movies in a Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man. We could take a while to tear Sony apart, but I think they finally get it now. They stopped what they were doing, they halted their universe that they were trying to build up, and now the new CEO seemingly understands that they actually have to make a good movie. The article continues and says that Ahuja expressed optimism that the next Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, Brand New Day, would do well, but noted you can't make a bad movie. Well, yeah, when would you ever really think you could? And look, I get it to an extent. If it's a low budget movie, you can write it off for some tax purposes. And again, before they kind of just had to make movies to keep their Spider-Man contract, which we assume they still have to do. But hopefully their mindset has changed. The article says, indeed, the Holland-led Spider-Man films, which are creatively produced by Marvel Studios, but largely financed and distributed by Sony, have been a bright spot, with 2021 Spider-Man No Way Home grossing nearly $2 billion. As for Sony's overall approach to making big box office hits, Ahuja said you have to make cultural events, pointing to films like Weapons, Sinners, and Sony's own 28 Years Later, in which, yes, they have had great success there. And he states it's a bit of marketing, but it's making it an event that people want to go out to theaters and watch together as well. That's always been the case. I think it's just even tougher than it used to be. The issue is it's tougher than it used to be because we're used to a lot of mid films now. So people are just waiting for it to come to streaming if they have just a little bit of interest in it. Especially in Sony's case, when all they've produced hasn't even been mid, but it's actually been really bad. Again, Venom being the exception. But I've actually said several times I miss when the superhero films did used to be giant cultural events. Marvel at the time did not produce a lot of movies. They would release 2, sometimes 3 superhero movies a year. So when they came out, it was a big event, and we didn't have Disney Plus at the time. We didn't have a excess of superhero projects. So when they did come out, they were about pretty big heroes, and they were a part of a connected universe, something that Sony did want to do, but really failed at. But Sony has had some major success with those films mentioned, Weapons, Sinners, 28 Years Later, and it seems like they do understand now what would make a good superhero movie. So no doubt they're going to try again. They're not going to let go of the rights to Spider-Man. It's such a big cash cow for them. And since we know Sony's going to start it up again, it's actually really nice to hear all of this coming from the current CEO. It's nice to hear that somebody, at least over there, and it happens to be the person in charge, understands what needs to happen. So it's a great thing that they ended what they were doing before. Hopefully during this time that they're not doing anything, they will learn from Marvel Studios and the new Spider-Man film. They'll learn from the connectivity of the MCU and the new DCU, and they'll be able to make a new universe that is connected that has Spider-Man in it. And it doesn't have to be Tom Holland's. And they could even do Miles Morales or Spider-Gwen or bigger villains that people actually want to see, like Kingpin or Norman Osborn. We know that they wanted to eventually do a Sinister Six movie, but what's a Sinister Six movie without Spider-Man? In an ideal world, yes, Marvel Studios would get the rights back to Spider-Man and all of the characters, and everything would be great. Unfortunately, I don't think Sony's ever given them up. So the best thing we can hope for instead is for them to actually make good movies about characters we actually want to see. And who knows, perhaps they'll strike another deal with Marvel to where these characters can all just exist in the MCU instead of having their own Sony universe. They could just fuse it with Marvel and still make a ton of money, probably a lot more money than they did with Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter. So this article tells us that Sony is at least coming to their senses a little bit. Hopefully they come to their senses a lot more and do something like letting Marvel use all of these characters in their universe instead of making their own. But if they do make their own, hopefully it'll be better than the last time. But go ahead, let me know your thoughts about this in the comments down below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all things Spider-Man and Marvel. And you can also find us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and Twitter. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.